Hi, I'm Ellie Waddington, a hypnobirthing teacher, positive birth advocate, and mum to two feral but adorable children. You are listening to the Bell Mama Hypnobirthing and Positive Birth podcast. This podcast is here to empower you with the tools, knowledge, and confidence you need for a calm, positive birth experience. Together, we'll tackle the big questions, bust some myths, and share practical tips for your journey into motherhood. Plus, you'll hear inspiring real birth stories from mums who've been there, and expert guests sharing their wisdom and insights. Whether you're planning your first or adding to your tribe, I've got you covered, so let's dive in. Hey gorgeous mama, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. If you are new here, welcome. I am so glad that you found us and that you are taking these first positive steps on your way to having a positive birth experience. And if you're not new here, welcome back. I am so glad that you're back, and hopefully you're finding these episodes helpful and that you're starting to feel a little bit more confident and prepared on your way to your birth journey. Now, first off, I'll apologise if you can hear a funny noise in the background. It's my dog. He's in the office with me and he snores quite loudly. He's 10 years old and my office is the warmest room in the house at the moment, so I don't have the heart to kick him out. He's fast asleep. So if you do hear a funny noise in the background, that's him. My deepest apologies, but I'm hoping that it won't be too loud, that you won't be put off too much by his loud snores. He's a Labrador, by the way. His name is Bosun. He's adorable. I love him so much, but he does snore very loudly. So this episode today, I have had quite a flurry, quite a few questions and inquiries through on Instagram and from my toolkit ladies, the ladies that are in my online course, the Hypnobirthing Toolkit. And there are a few of them that I thought, these would make really good topics, really good questions for the podcast. So I've put a few of them together and I've done a little bit of a Q&A for today's episode. And by the way, if you are looking for some sort of course to take to help yourself get a little bit more prepared, a little bit more confident for your upcoming birth, my course, the Hypnobirthing Toolkit, is absolutely perfect for you. So it's largely made up of pre-recorded content, loads of videos in there on lots of different topics to help you get prepared, to help minimize your fears, address what kind of fears you're having, different hypnobirthing techniques, learn about the birth process, all the things that you need to learn to have your positive birth experience. We have a live class once a month as well, where I go a bit more in depth into some of the juicier topics, and it gives you a chance to ask questions and get involved and be a bit more proactive in your birth education. That was really, really important to me when I created this course. We have weekly live guided relaxations inside the Facebook group. We have a Facebook group as well. Lovely, amazing vibe, really nice, supportive little Facebook community. There's a PDF library of lots of different topics of information to help you make decisions around your birth plan. And yeah, there's loads of stuff in there, lots of stuff, and it's £67 usually, but actually because you are listening to this podcast right now, you can get yourself a little discount using the discount code in the description down below. So use the discount code, click the link and go over and get yourself into the Hypnobirthing Toolkit. I cannot wait to meet you, get to know you, and support you on your positive birth journey. Now, let's get into today's episode. As I said before, we are doing a Q&A episode, so let's get started. So the first question comes from one of my toolkit ladies. She's in the Hypnobirthing Toolkit, and she is British, but she lives in a different country. She's going to give birth in this other country as well. Now, all the way through her pregnancy so far, her intention was that she was going to give birth with minimal intervention, minimal pain relief, but she wanted to use the gas and air potentially. But she has literally just found out very recently in the last week that in this particular country, actually they don't have gas and air. It's not an option that's going to be available to her. And that the only pain relief option that's going to be available to her is an epidural. So those are two extremes, that she's either going to give birth completely without pain relief or an epidural, which is obviously complete pain relief. And those are two very opposite ends of the spectrum. And it's completely thrown her because this wasn't her original plan. So she basically has got in touch to ask, where do I go from here? How do I change my mindset? How do I start to feel confident about the fact that the pain relief that I wanted is no longer an option for me. And she also talked a little bit about the fear of the pain. The pain of childbirth is what scares her the most. And I completely understand that, because I think that is what concerns most women, to be honest, because that's all we hear, isn't it? Whenever you hear birth stories, time and time again, it's always about the pain. It's always how excruciating it was, how painful it was, and that's all we seem to hear, and that's all we remember. That's all we remember about birth. So no wonder so many of us are so scared of the pain of childbirth. And I am absolutely not one of those hypnobirthing teachers that tries to tell you that if you do it right, if you do enough preparation, get all your meditations right and your breathing, that you're going to have a pain-free birth. I absolutely would never tell somebody that. I think that's hugely unfair, because discomfort is a part of childbirth. It is a part of that process. You are literally getting a person from the inside of you to the outside of you. Yes, that is going to be an uncomfortable process. But that doesn't mean that you're going to have to suffer through it. That, pain does not always mean suffering. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this in just a minute. But here are the steps that I would basically recommend to this lady who's going through this, who suddenly had a change of plan, and what I recommend to her, basically. So first off, whenever you have a sudden change of plan in your birth plan, in your birth experience, something suddenly happens that you didn't want, what I would do first off is have your shitty 5 minutes. And this basically means just get your feelings out. Just allow yourself those few minutes just to get your feelings out. You stamp, you scream, you cry, you hit the wall, you do whatever you need to do to get those feelings out. And then once you've had your shitty 5 minutes, then you just kind of dust yourself off, and you compose yourself and you get yourself together. You've got those feelings out, and now that's done and dusted, and now you're going to move on. You're going to make positive steps to see what else you can do in this situation. Secondly, I recommend that you kind of change the way that you view this situation. So yes, it is a bummer. It's awful that this has happened. What you wanted, what you expected to happen and expected to have during your birth experience, that gas and air that you wanted, is no longer an option to you. But you kind of have to view this kind of as an adaptation, okay? It's not a failure, it's not a disaster, it's not a catastrophe, it's an adaptation, okay? You're just going to have to adapt and evolve and roll with what you have, roll with what the facts are, Third, use the affirmation. This is a really, really great affirmation, and it goes, I control what I can and let go of what I can't. Okay, I'll say it again. I control what I can and let go of what I can't. And this is a really great affirmation to use all the way through your pregnancy and in birth, particularly, if there are some things that are a bit, up in the air, if maybe you have some risk factors, it means that it could go either way. This is a really great affirmation to use to remind yourself, look, there are going to be some things that are going to be completely outside of your control, okay? Maybe the pain relief isn't available to you that you wanted. Maybe you want a birth pool and you get there and the birth pools are in use. Maybe there's a really lovely midwife that you built up a relationship with and you want her at your birth, but actually on the day she's not on call, she's not working on that day. There are going to be some things that are completely outside of your control. So you have to let those things go. But there are going to be things that are within your control, and those are the things that you have to focus on, okay? Those are the things that you have to put in your mind, put on your birth plan, and work towards and focus on. The things that you can control, okay? The choices that you can make, the preparation that you can do, who's with you at your birth. All these things are things that you absolutely can control. Now, the next thing that I would do is actually, this is a really great opportunity for some journaling, okay? I know that some people look upon journaling as a bit of a teenage girl thing and, like, dear diary, and it's absolutely not. Journaling is just about making sense of your feelings, particularly if you have lots of emotions, lots of thoughts floating around in your head and, you it's all a bit of a blur and you don't really know what to make of it, journaling is a really, really great way to get those down onto paper. You don't have to have a literal journal. If you're going to journal regularly, yes, get one. And I am just such a fan of notebooks. I'm such a fan of journals and notebooks. I'm pretty stationary, so absolutely do invest in one if that's what you want to do. I definitely have several journals. But if it's not going to be your thing regularly, then just get a piece of paper, lined paper, whatever, if it's just going to be a once-off, and just write down. This is as a technique that we call free writing, and you just basically just put your pen on the paper and write down anything that comes into your head. Just let your pen go, okay? Just let your hand write whatever is coming out of your head, whatever is coming out of your thoughts. Get it all down onto paper, and that will help you to make sense of it, and it will help you to kind of figure out what is going on in your head. You could also use a method of journaling called the why method as well, and this is a really great method to use to get to the bottom of particular fears. So in this example, this particular lady who is, she's scared of the pain of childbirth. So I would ask myself, why am I so scared of pain? Okay, and then you write down your answer. Why am I scared of pain? And then for that answer, you write why. Why is this blah, 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 blah? And then for that answer, why? Blah, 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 blah. And you eventually get to the cause of it. You go why? And you will eventually get to the root cause of that fear. So do some journaling. That's what I would do, is get yourself a piece of paper and figure out where this is coming from and make sense of those thoughts that are going around in your head. And the next is reframe the way that you look at pain. Obviously, lots of this advice is kind of about change of plans in general, but this particular lady we're talking about, the fact that the reason that she's been thrown by this is because she's quite scared of the pain. So for this step specifically for you, reframe the way that you look at pain. Now, in the Hypnobirthing Toolkit, there is a video called Reframing Pain. Make sure that you watch that. But essentially, I am talking about reframing the way that you look at the pain of childbirth. It's not something pathological. It's not pain like breaking a bone or a toothache or anything like that that's not supposed to happen. Those things are not something that are routinely supposed to happen in our body. Childbirth is a kind of discomfort, a kind of pain that our body is supposed to go through. So it's like a baby teething, for example. It's like period pain. It's, like growing pains. Those are things that our body is supposed to go through. And so our body provides us with coping mechanisms for that. We have oxytocin, we have endorphins, we have ways of coping with that. And you can also look at it as something that's very intentional. Okay, so with every contraction, for example, which is largely where the discomfort is coming from, you know that your body is doing something very intentional with every single contraction. It is bringing your baby closer to you. That is what those contractions are doing. They are intentional. And also bear in mind that the pain isn't just constant. You're not just in constant agony for 24 hours or 12 hours or whatever. And I think there's this massive misconception with first-time mums in particular, if you haven't been through labour before. Everyone just seems to think that you're just going to be in pain constantly for the entire duration of labour, and you're not. You are literally only in that discomfort during the contractions. Now, early on in labour, those contractions, they could be, 20 minutes, half an hour apart, and they only last about a minute, and they rise and they peak and they trail off again just like a wave. So you only have those kind of brief periods of pain where you're feeling it, and in between those contractions you feel relatively normal. Now, as labour progresses, the gaps in between get shorter and shorter, but as labour progresses, the amount of oxytocin, the amount of endorphins that you are releasing to help deal with those contractions, they are increasing. So Mother Nature has provided you with everything that you need to cope with labour. Okay, Mother Nature wouldn't have dealt you something that you couldn't go through, okay? Because if that were the case, then obviously the human race would have died out a long time ago. because pain relief is a relatively recent invention. So try and reframe the way that you are looking at pain. And something that I found really helpful actually during my second labour was I discovered that the amount of pressure, the amount of power being created in my uterus, towards the end of labour when I was having those big contractions for a minute at a time, the amount of power being created in my uterus was the equivalent of about 60 pounds, which is what you need to crush a watermelon. So I was thinking, wow, my body is creating enough power to crush a watermelon right now. And that made me feel so powerful. I loved thinking about that. I really loved taking on that message. That just made me feel so powerful and so amazing. And so the last thing that I would do, so you have gone through all those steps, hopefully, and the last thing is just make sure that you have other coping techniques available to you. Obviously, you now have to make a decision whether you want to go with the epidural, which I know from our conversations, you don't. Epidural, there are lots of risks that come along with it to mum and to baby, and that's something that you want to avoid if possible. So in which case, make it more likely that you'll be able to do it without the epidural. So look at the breathing techniques, look at the visualization, everything that you are learning in the hypnobirthing toolkit, take that on, practice it, and make it second nature. Okay, you could also invest in a birth comb or the Aura Orbs. The Aura Orbs, by the way, are absolutely amazing, and you can get a discount code for that in the description down below, so definitely have a look at that. You could use aromatherapy, so lavender oil is really great. You can use a hot compress across the bottom of your back, use the bath, use the shower. There are just so many options to you. Make sure that you stay active and upright as well. That's going to be the main thing that helps you stay comfortable during labour, is making sure that you are able to stay upright and active. So yeah, obviously there is so much more that I could talk about with this subject. It's such a juicy kind of meaty thing to get into, but I think I've covered everything that I would basically suggest to you, to this wonderful woman out there listening. This is what I would suggest. So go through those steps and let me know how you're getting on. So next up, we have a question that came through on my Instagram DMs from a follower. She listens to the podcast. She said some very nice things about the podcast, by the way. That made me smile. That made my day. So she is basically asking, when are vaginal examinations medically necessary? So she basically has decided she'd rather not have them, but she'd like to know, is there a point where, do you know what, it's probably best that I do accept them at this point? So, right, let's get into this. There's a lot to talk about with vaginal examinations. So my general kind of summarizing answer to this would be that only you can decide when you consider a vaginal examination to be medically necessary. Okay, only you can make that decision. But I'm going to talk you through some points, some notes that I've written down on this. So for anyone that doesn't know what a vaginal examination is, so when you are in labour, your medical professional, your midwife or your doctor, whoever, will offer you a vaginal examination, which is basically where they will insert 2 fingers into your vagina to measure how dilated your cervix is. Now, your cervix throughout labour, it will go from tight shut, as labour starts, it will be completely shut, and then as labour progresses, it will slowly open to 10 centimetres, and 10 centimetres is where your body will start feeling that urge to push. That's where baby is usually ready to start coming out. And so your healthcare professional will want to do an examination to figure out how dilated your cervix is. Now, what I want you to remember is that all that examination can tell you is how dilated your cervix is. Okay, now surely you're thinking, right, okay, well that's obvious, that's literally what you just said. But what I mean is that a vaginal examination cannot tell you how quickly your labor is going to go, or how long it's going to last, or anything like that, because there have been stories where someone will literally go from 4 centimeters to fully dilated in the space of half an hour. Actually, there are several birth stories on this podcast where that has happened, where the dilation has happened really, really quickly. But there are also situations where someone could be, at 8 centimeters for hours and it seems to stop progressing, and it's your body taking a break. So your vaginal examination cannot tell you how long labor is going to last. And it's always optional. I want that to be the number one message that everyone takes away from this, is that only you can decide whether you accept a vaginal examination or not. Okay, they are not mandatory, they're not obligatory. You do not have to accept somebody putting their fingers inside your vagina to determine how dilated your cervix is, because it is ultimately quite a flawed it's quite a flawed way of figuring out where you are in your labor, because it's all done by guessing. They're not holding a ruler or a tape measure in there measuring your cervix. It's someone guessing by being able to feel. And there are actually several situations that I've read where 2 different healthcare professionals will disagree on how dilated the cervix actually is. But it is not the oracle, it is not a crystal ball, it's not the all-knowing predictor of where you are in your labour. All it can tell you is literally how dilated your cervix is. Now, I have heard some situations where people, they're told by their healthcare professionals that in order for us to admit you to the labour ward, we have to check that you are at least 4 centimetres dilated, because that's where we know you're in active labour. This is absolutely not true. You do not have to accept a vaginal examination to be allowed onto the ward. There are lots of different ways that they can establish how far along you are in labour. They can use things like how far apart your contractions are, your body language, whether you are able to talk or function through your contractions, or whether you're having to breathe and slow down. They can look at how tense your shoulders are. They can look at the purple line down the bottom of your back. There are so many other ways that a good midwife will be able to tell whether or not you're in established labour, that don't involve putting her fingers inside your vagina if you do not want her to. And I'd like to say, although I am obviously talking a lot about, it's your right to decline it, it's also your right to accept it. If you've decided, actually, do you know what, I do want vaginal examinations, I'm happy for them to go ahead, all power to you, go ahead. That's absolutely your choice. But it's also your choice to decline them if you want to. And you can also change your mind as well. You can actually say, do you know what, I was happy for a vaginal examination earlier, but I don't want any more. Or I'm happy for one when I first arrive at the ward, but then I don't want any more after that. It's your body, your birth, your choice. You can absolutely run the show in that regard. So we talked about why it might be offered to you. So you're checking the how dilated your cervix is. It can also be offered in the case of if labour has appeared to stall, if it has slowed down, if progress hasn't been made. It can also be used to check the position of baby's head, sort of how far down it is, whether it's facing a particular way, what position it's in. It can also be used to determine whether the waters have broken, but your healthcare professional should always tell you why they want to perform the vaginal examination, and that you get consent for every single vaginal examination that they do perform. So if it is just a routine, you want to see how you're progressing, then they will tell you that. Or if they want to determine which position baby is in because they're a little bit unsure, then they will tell you that. So it's completely up to you whether you want to accept a vaginal examination for that reason or the other reason or whatever. There are some risks to vaginal examinations. It's uncomfortable. It can feel quite intrusive to some women. There's also the risk of introducing bacteria and infection into the vagina. Every single time you put something into the vagina, even if it is a sterile, gloved hand, there's always the risk of introducing infection, and that could be potentially problematic if your waters have broken at the beginning of labour. There's already an increased risk of infection there anyway, so you don't want to necessarily be introducing more things into the vagina that could increase that risk further. So they can be uncomfortable, they can be painful as well, and sometimes if waters haven't already gone, they can accidentally rupture the membranes, they can accidentally rupture the waters, which you might not have wanted. That might not have been the intended purpose of the vaginal examination. So those are things that you have to consider. And sometimes it can be actually quite disheartening. So if you've been in labour for a long time and your midwife says, oh, you're only 5 centimetres, that can be a real knock. That can be really disheartening. Whereas if you didn't know where you were in labour, you could still keep going, whereas if you find out that actually you're reaching the end of your abilities and you're only 5 centimetres, that might make you want to give up, and it might make you want to accept things that you really didn't want to accept. So have a think about how it would affect you mentally if you were to find out that actually the cervix wasn't as dilated as you thought it might be. So overall, in answer to the question, when is it medically necessary to have a vaginal examination? This is something that only you can decide for yourself. And this is why it's so important to make a birth plan ahead of time and make those decisions ahead of time. So do some research, do some really good research into vaginal examinations and things that come along with it, and figure out for you under what circumstances would you be prepared to accept one, because it's not up to me to say, oh, in this situation you should definitely accept one, because my priorities are probably going to be very different to your priorities. All I can do is signpost you to various different sources of information, tell you facts, and allow you to make your own decisions. So I hope that has made some sense. I hope that you are a little bit clearer in vaginal examinations and making that decision. There are loads of tools inside the hypnobirthing toolkit for helping you make those decisions, and more information on that. So if you do want to have some more information, have some more guidance on making decisions and putting together birth plans, get yourself inside the hypnobirthing toolkit and use the discount code in the description down below. And the final question that I am going to answer today, that came through my Instagram DMs, is, what have you found to be the hardest part of motherhood? And this for me is a really easy answer. I could answer this absolutely immediately. There have been loads of hard parts of motherhood. There are definitely, parts that are really, really difficult, but also parts that are really, really wonderful. And I've loved my motherhood journey so far, but for me, so far, the absolute hands and away hardest part of motherhood has been the newborn stage. I do not handle sleep deprivation well at all. I do not function well on no sleep at all. And so for me, it was the newborn days when there were very small gaps between feeds. That was the hardest part for me. And I remember getting this thing that people call bed dread, where as evening approached, and I would start to get really scared of going to bed, knowing full well that I would just fall asleep and be woken up half an hour later or what have you. And I can remember that so vividly with both my kids. What did make it easier the second time round, though, for anyone listening that is about to go through this? So with my first baby, I was very much, I followed all the advice about, baby must go in their cot, on their back, no exceptions, every single time, sleep alone because that's the safest thing. And so I just absolutely exhausted myself trying to get my baby to sleep in his cot. Every single time I'd get him to sleep, rock him to sleep or boob him to sleep and put him down in his cot. Then he'd wake up half an hour later. And I absolutely exhausted myself doing that. But with my second baby, I was all prepared to do that again until one night I woke up and realised that I had fallen asleep during a breastfeed, and she had slid off my lap and was balancing on her head on the edge of the bed, and that terrified me. Luckily, she was absolutely fine, but it could have been so much worse. And so after that incident, I learned all about breastfeeding lying down and safe bed sharing, so that if I was at the point of exhaustion, I know I knew that I could feed her lying down and that she wasn't going to get hurt. That was far safer. I learned how to tuck all the covers away from her. There was the next to me cot on the edge of the bed so she wouldn't be able to roll off. I learned how to do the C curl. And so learning how to safely co-sleep with my baby, so with my second baby, that saved me so much sleep deprivation, and I slept a lot better, got so much more sleep with her than I did with my first. And so I recommend to all my clients, everyone that is preparing for postpartum, learn how to safely co-sleep. Even if your intention is not to co-sleep, if you learn how to do it safely, learn how to prepare your bed safely, at least you know that if you do accidentally nod off, if you do accidentally fall asleep, your baby is still going to be safe. And actually the NHS and the Lullaby Trust, lots of organisations are now actually coming to this realisation that teaching women how to co-sleep safely is better for the baby than shaming them and trying to convince them to desperately stay awake all the way through the night for the night feeds, put the baby back in the cot every single time, because that's when babies fall off laps, they get wedged on the side of sofas because mum falls asleep out of pure exhaustion, and that's when accidents happen. So learn about safe co-sleeping. Even if you never intend to use it, at least you know how to prepare your bed safely just in case you do nod off, and that means that baby is still going to be safe. So that's the episode for today. I didn't think that would take half an hour to get through. I obviously talk a lot more than I realised. But anyway, so that is all for this episode. As always, if you have any questions, anything that would be great content for a future episode, do feel free to email me or send me a little DM on Instagram. And yeah, I will see you next time. Talk to you next week. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Belle Mama Hypnobirthing and Positive Birth podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a review and hit subscribe on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an update. I'd love to hear from you, so if there's a topic you'd like me to cover, or a question you'd like answered, or if you'd like to share your birth story, please get in touch by email or DM me on Instagram. Until next time, take care.